I think that we need to give another round of applause for the library, because I don't think you guys realize, I think hopefully you do, how special this institution is. I think libraries are one of the last institutions in our country that they just don't expect anything from us. There's not a membership. You don't have to pay annually. You get to come in here for free and have a sense of community. It's more than just books. We're having this amazing discussion about these awesome women veterans in this library. And I think Henderson specifically just puts on high quality programs throughout the year that don't cost us anything. I live in Indiana, and the library is okay there. That's all I'm saying. This library, I'm very partial to it, and when I first got to be friends with Shannon, she goes, well, you work at Henderson, so you get a library card. I'm like, yeah, I live here, and I annoy them and bug them all the time. But I just think what this library provides is very special, and the attention to detail that the staff have here is just really special to put these events on. So let's give them an applause. Timely that we're honoring women in this way, considering Women's Month starts Saturday, so and International Women's Day is the 8th, so don't forget that. So very, very just timely. I apologize in advance. I've not read The Women yet. I know everybody's like, I was given a free copy here at the library. I've been in like 3 plays at the same time. One was Shakespeare, so I was doing a lot of memorizing of lines, but I'm going to read it. You were already telling me to read Healing Wounds as well, so I've got a list a mile long of books to read. So we're going to just start off with a few general questions and then get to some specific for each one of you. So we're going to start off with talking about the women, and it highlights, for those of you that have read it, the often overlooked role of women in the Vietnam War. And so how did reading this novel, even though it's historical fiction, how did reading this novel resonate with you in your own personal experiences? We'll start. Okay.
Well, I told Emily tonight is my 56th book club to speak to.
Oh, wow.
And there was a Facebook page, Kristin Hannah, the Women, and I made a couple of posts, some about the good. That's right, Mike.
It's okay.
I'm not used to speaking on a mic, so the first post was about the difficult part of my experience, my PTSD, that I'll tell you about later. But the other part was the good part about Bob Hope and Sammy Davis Jr. And some of you who are younger don't have a clue who they are. But, oh yeah, those of us, I said I'm almost 78 years old, and I told Emily, I said, my husband didn't want me to come tonight because a month ago today I had a total knee replacement. And I drove here from Louisville. So, Day for Women. I said, you can't keep good women down. No. Each one of us knows that. And if you're married to a woman, you know that too. But when I picked up The Women, I actually saw it featured on Hoda and Jenna the day that it was released. And I immediately ordered it. And I'm a doer. I'm not a reader. But I couldn't put it down. I would tell you that it's a very, very important book, but I will tell you, you had better read The Healer, because that is nonfiction. And the woman who's responsible for that, Diane Carlson Evans, is the woman who's responsible for the Vietnam Women's Memorial that was dedicated in '93, and we were both there. And it's just, she is such a strong woman. She experienced The Women goes into a lot of the physical relationships that Frankie had with different people. There was not a whole lot of that in The Healer, and it's just a really, really, really important book for each one of us to read. I kind of had to laugh as far as the role of female Vietnam veterans. You know, the men always seem to wear their hats that show that they're either retired Army or retired Air Force or whatever. I'm not going to wear a hat because I'm not going to mess my hair up. But we were recently in Crooks in Louisville, and one of the veterans, saw my husband's hat and thanked him for his service. And so I'm standing there, and I'm never short on words. I've been married for 52 years, and Bob, I know, wants to put earplugs in, but that's just too bad. But anyway, so I said to this gentleman who was a veteran, I said, I served too. And he looked at me and he said, you serve in the deli? Well, I'm going to tell you something. Wow. I'm a very strong Christian woman, but if I had had a cross, I would have put it up there. But that's the general public doesn't really understand that women served in Vietnam, whether they were donut dollies or whether they were military nurses. And Kristin Hannah has brought that to the light in the book, The Women.
And how has it resonated with you, the book?
Pretty much the same. I will say that Kristin Hannah did mention the Red Cross, the donut dollies, the Army Special Services, the USO. There were a lot of us there. I think many of us saw some of the things that other Army people saw that, didn't get a chance to get out into the field. Of course, the nurses, I know, they stayed in the rear. That's a terrible way to put it, but that's what they called it. Whereas we went out to the field every day, every single day. And I wouldn't take anything at all for that year. That was probably the best year of my life. But, and that was riding in helicopters, which most people my age at that time, I was 22 when I went over there. 77 now, and I've forgotten a lot of it, I'm sure. But I wouldn't take anything for that year. It was wonderful.
First of all, I would like to say thank you to these ladies here for what they did and the trails that they blazed. But because of them, I was able to have a completely different experience when I was in Afghanistan. But there are still parts of that book that resonated with me, and it was once you came home, dealing with what you had been through and what you had seen, and trying to find the right resources and trying to find the people that will talk to you and help you through those difficulties. And again, these ladies right here are the reason that I am able to be here and do what I did in Afghanistan, and I am so thankful for you ladies.
The second question is, Kristin Hannah emphasizes the bond between the women who served. So how did your relationships with fellow female service members shape your experience?
When you were in Vietnam, of course, you didn't have friends and family. You go over there by yourself, and that was the reality. Most of us went over individually, and we came home individually, which leads you with a sense of, well, I was scared to death. I'm 24 years old, and honestly, it was the first time that I'd ever been totally by myself, without my family, and without my friends, and not out of the United States. And Southeast Asia is totally different than what we experience here in the United States. There's only one nurse that I served with in Vietnam, and I was the only military member on a Pan Am 747 going to Vietnam. And I was, like I said, scared to death. The only other females that were on there were the flight attendants. And I sat in the front seat, and I'm sure the 20-hour flight, which is what we had, I white knuckled pretty much the whole time. But there is one nurse that I have stayed in touch with. I actually emailed her a couple of days ago. We were in the same area, the worst facility that I've ever stayed in, for 3 days until they decided where you were going to be stationed in Vietnam. They ask you to give them 3 choices. And I mean, if you haven't been to Vietnam, where are you going to tell them? But we both got assigned to the same hospital, and her ex-husband now, but her first husband, she's married now to a Marine, and her first husband is mentioned in the book Healing Wounds. And Diane Carlson talks specifically about his name because he was a U.S. Senator, and he really fought that memorial being, this is an exact replica of the Vietnam Women's Memorial. And luckily it's a San Francisco music box company that plays Wind Beneath My Wings that my husband found and bought for me. He's a Vietnam veteran also, so he likes to buy me lots of things, which I appreciate. But she's the only one that I've ever stayed in touch with. I wonder where the other ones are, but you just lose track of them.
Well, I've got a whole different story from that. We went over as a group. We trained in D.C. for 2 weeks. 2 weeks to tell us what being in Vietnam was gonna be like. And we all went over there together, and then we got separated out of Saigon. Everybody was sent, to different units. I went to, it was a city called Nha Trang first, and I stayed there for 4 months. And I am sorry to say, I really don't remember but one of the other ladies that was there. But I was transferred north to Chulai, where I stayed for 9 months, and I am still in contact with about 7 or 8 of the girls that I worked with there. Yeah, because it's almost daily. Facebook, texting, any way that we can keep in touch with each other. I had 2 messages that came to me today by text. Break a leg. And I said, well, I really don't want to break a leg, but, they build me up now just like they did when I was there. Super, super nice ladies.
I have a couple of different experiences I want to talk about. I was in a group of 30 people for our last training right before we shipped out to Afghanistan. And I went as an individual, but we kind of trained together, and then we were all spread out to the wind. And in that group of 30, there were 5 women, and we were together for a month, and we became very close. And then when we got in country, we all went 5 different directions. And some of us could stay in touch, and some of us could not. But there are 2 ladies that I started that training with that I'm still in touch with today, and we love keeping up with each other. I've been back for about almost 13 years now, and we still keep in touch. There's like that bond that happens that it's unbreakable. And there is another female that I met back in 2005. We were stationed together out at Edwards Air Force Base. And throughout the rest of our career, we pretty much matched up with each other on every assignment. I would go to Germany and she would go to DC, but every other assignment we were together. It was California or Florida. And she was an aviator, and she had deployed many times as an aviator. And when I was deploying, I'm like, hey, Soju, her call sign. Her real name's Michelle, but we'll go with Soju. What should I expect? What's it like to be a female in a male-dominant field being deployed, and now you're in a country where women are not regarded very highly? How do I deal with that? And so she was invaluable to me to learn and to teach me about what I needed to do, things I needed to be aware of, which are a little different than what the men need to be aware of, right? And then she deployed to Afghanistan after I got back, but she deployed this time, instead of as an aviator, as I'll call it, we had a desk job. We flew a desk, right? She was running contracts, and she was doing the same kind of things that I had done. And then it was my turn to tell her, like, oh, well, this is different than what you're used to doing. Like, you're used to doing a mission and then coming back to the safe place, but you're going to be in it the whole time. And so it was really nice to be able to pay back to her what she had paid back or had given to me previously. She's a great friend. We keep in touch. She lives in Florida. She's been through Henderson many times. She's been in this library. And so it's just the female bond that you make in the military. It's amazing. I love it.
And you touched on this already with your example, but what other misconceptions do you think the public still holds about women's roles in Vietnam and beyond?
Well, Mash did us no favors. They, people think that Hot Lips, was a true character, and that it was a comedy. They showed some difficult things, but it was primarily a comedy. And for those of us that watched China Beach afterwards with Dana Delaney, that was very much like it was. Tough times, different roles that women played there, and it was not an easy read, just like the women is not an easy read. Healing wounds is even more difficult, and make sure you read that before she speaks, because it's a powerful book, and it is a realistic book, and she goes into the difficult things that she did in the hospital that totally changed her life, and it's definitely a worth read.
What was the question?
What misconceptions do you think the public still has about women who served in Vietnam or other
Well, when Marge started talking about China Beach, I was like, yes. That was one of my favorite shows during the 80s because it was about the Red Cross donut house. So I really enjoyed that. But I just, it's just hard to imagine what some people might say to you or how they might look at you if you even say that you spent a year in Vietnam. I have had, women, I've never had any really bad comments from any women about being over there, except one friend did say, how could you do that to your mother? And I was like, oh, well, she didn't like it, but, yeah, so too bad, I went anyway. I've never had any man do any kind of a put down, fortunately. Because I think if anyone had ever really said anything rude or crude or condescending, I probably wouldn't have been a very good Christian lady. I might go off on that. But no, for the most part, everybody that I've talked to has been very, very proud, very happy for me. Number one, that I got over there and came back. But I've had good, really, really good comments and relationships with people that did want to know what we did.
That's great. That's great.
Again, I had a very different experience. I do think there are still people who are questioning women in Vietnam. But because of, again, what these ladies did, I've never had to deal with that with my service, and I'm thankful to you. I will forever say that. I am so thankful for these ladies and for what we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. These are my giants that I got to stand and do my career on. So thank you, ladies.
Now we've got a couple questions for Marcia. Were you able to look these over or no? Oh, no. You look scared. Okay. It's okay. All right, here we go. Okay. The book highlights how women navigated the male-dominated military world. So, do you ever feel like you had to prove yourself? And if so, how did you handle those situations?
Okay, as far as having to prove myself, since our unit was all females, and we were there at the invitation of the Pentagon, Department of Defense. Nobody really gave us a hard time about it. We had one field grade officer who hated us. I mean, he absolutely despised us. But his unit, one of the LZs that we had to go to every week, he was the commanding officer. And he would try to say, oh no, you can't come out this week, or oh no, we're expecting rocket attacks, and he had every excuse under the sun for us not to go out there. And I remember this one of our unit directors, she would talk to him and she'd say, that's fine, Major so-and-so, you can expect us at about 1 o'clock. We've got a couple of other stops that we're going to make, because we would try to go to at least 3 fire bases or landing zones a day, and never had any problem arranging transportation. We could call just about any helicopter company and say, we need to ride out to LC West today. Have you got anybody going? So you say, yeah, got plenty of room, pick you up at 6 a.m. And we were like, oh boy, okay. But that was normal. That was really normal. But yeah, we got good support from almost everybody except that one man. He didn't like us. He didn't like anything about us. But when we would go out to his unit, he did let his men go, come down to visit us. Because it was time for them to play.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, they're working hard and they deserve to play a little bit.
Did he ever tell you why? He didn't care for you guys, or did he give a reason?
No, he just said we had absolutely no business there. Yeah, there's none, absolutely no business.
And this next question is for you as well. If you could, obviously you're talking to a group today, but if you could tell maybe a younger woman that maybe is not familiar with the role of donut dollies, what would you want her to know when describing what you did in the role?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would want her to know is that there are no donuts involved.
I was gonna ask.
There was no donuts in Vietnam, it was too hot.
So why did they call it that?
That came about initially during World War II and Korea both. The Red Cross girls would go out with coffee and donuts in the morning and take it out. We took Kool-Aid out to the flight lines and gave guys Kool-Aid out there. But I would tell young girls today, there's not really an SRAO program going on now. Once the Vietnam War ended, that was it. It was totally disbanded. But there are other organizations that you can go with, if you want to get into situations like that. You've got like I said, mentioned a while ago, the special services. You can go with them. Myself, I went to Korea with the USO because I wasn't ready to stop traveling yet. So there are all kinds of programs that young ladies can get into if they want to work side by side with the military. And I think the military pretty much appreciates everything that we do now.
Great. Okay, Mark, move on. A couple for you. Now, you mentioned this, but you worked on medical teams for the Bob Hope Christmas Tour and Sammy Davis Jr. USO show. So what was it like to witness those, those figures coming there and those kind of moments of hope and joy amidst the background of such a hard, tough war?
Well, it was the one time that the soldiers that were allowed to come to the shows, that they were allowed to be entertained. There wasn't a whole lot of entertainment that went on in Vietnam. And, like Frankie talks about the club where they all went to drink. Yeah, we had one. And I drank more probably in Vietnam than I ever have in my life. Lots of drugs in Vietnam. So when the soldiers came to the shows, and we went in lots of areas in Vietnam that were, not really secure areas. One thing that, I thought Bob Hope walked on water before I went to Vietnam, and he had done those shows for quite some time. And Joey Heather and a lot of the people that he took, he actually took Gomer Pyle.
Oh, really?
And yeah, he had him, and he got sick before he was supposed to entertain, and the doctor told me to start an IV on him, and he did not say, well, golly. But the thing I was a little miffed at is Bob Hope never went into the hospital to see any of our patients. There were some patients that got to come to the shows that were able to go, but we had a lot of soldiers who were bedbound in the hospital that should have had an opportunity to have met him and to have seen some of the stars that he brought with him. Sammy Davis Jr. was a little bit different. He brought his wife over there. Her name was Altavis. She was probably a foot taller than he was. He ran us late every time we had a show because he could not spend enough time with the soldiers, including the patients. One of my best experiences with him is we went into Bangkok, into Thailand, and not Bangkok, we went to a different place in Thailand, and he went aboard an aircraft carrier. And the F-16 bombs were loaded in the morning, but when he got on stage and sang Mr. Bojangles, there was not a sound that was made on that ship. And it was a totally different experience. One thing that I was a little miffed at too, when I traveled with the Bob Hope show, we flew like on 4 C-130, which are some of the big aircraft, and we stayed in Bangkok every night. Well, I was thrilled because I had a bathtub. And you know, I stayed in a really nice room. And who knows how much money that cost our government. Vietnam cost our US government, or our US people, $210 billion back in those dollars, back in those days.
That's a lot of money. Now, over time, you kind of touched on this as well. You became an advocate for veterans with PTSD. What lessons have you learned about healing from trauma, and what advice would you give veterans today?
Well, one of the reasons that I speak so much is because God saved me when I couldn't save myself. And we are all here to make a difference. I don't care whether you're on the front lines entertaining the troops, that you are leading women to be able to be leaders in the aviation world. I retired from UPS in Louisville. We had lots of female pilots, and a lot of them came from the military. Well, I was 24 when I went to Vietnam. I had been on active duty for 4 years. I was a captain, so I was older than a lot of the nurses that went. And so they were, in 1972, they were starting to shut down a lot of the hospitals because we needed our medical people back in the United States to take care of our injured soldiers. So we got a radio call that a Chinook helicopter had crashed. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Chinook is, they're the large cargo helicopters that have got the blades on both ends. If you're close to Fort Knox, we see them there, but you don't see them very often. Well, there were 4 Chinooks that were traveling in a formation that were taking soldiers who had been on the front line for 6 months and had not had time off. So they were taking them on what they called a 3-day R&R, which pretty much stands for rest and recovery. They were taking them to a beautiful beach area in Vietnam, and Vietnam's a beautiful country. Many of my friends, some of the women in the book clubs, have actually gone back there the past few years. And I mean, the women break the sand at the hotels before every morning, so the guests have a beautiful place to stay. Well, we got the call that at first they thought it was enemy fire. So when one of the helicopters exploded, all the other 3 took off. Well, it turned out it was not enemy fire. One of the pins came out of the rotor blade of the helicopter, and it brought the helicopter down. So we were notified that they were bringing all the bodies back to our hospital. And since I was one of the senior nurses, I was the member of a 6-person team that received 34 totally burned, dismembered bodies. And you can Google May 10th, 1972, Vietnam Chinook helicopter crash. You'll see the names and where they were from of every one of those bodies. Well, for 2 days, we worked to try to find teeth. I mean, you'd find a burned head, you'd find burned legs. It was not a human form that looked like that at all. And, I was a head nurse on male orthopedics. I had never seen anything like that. And so for 2 days, we did not wear gloves because we were trying to use our best tactile senses to be able to find teeth, rings, dog tags, anything we could find to bring those bodies back home. And so we continued to do what we needed to do. 2 weeks later, I go back to the United States, and I never spoke to anyone about it until 2005. And like I said, I'm married to a Vietnam veteran, but I'm a caregiver. I'm not a care receiver. And one thing that I have learned through life, I don't care what your trauma is. If you have a significant trauma in your life, maybe you've been domestically violenced, maybe your kids were bullied in school, maybe you've been raped, maybe you've taken care of 34 dead soldiers. We decide that if we don't deal with it, it's going to go away. And that I was a master at it. I never worked in a hospital after Vietnam. I was a hospital nurse. I liked taking care of my patients, but I also really liked supporting the families. But I just couldn't take a chance of ever seeing that again. Well, I'm raising 2 daughters. I'm working in a doctor's office. I'm doing whatever women need to do. And I retired as an occupational health nurse manager from UPS in Louisville. And we started a program on the weekends where we took our cargo ships and we converted them to passenger ships on the weekends. And the National Transportation Safety Board said we had a plan in place in case we crashed. So they decided, since I was a Vietnam veteran nurse, to put me in charge of the on-site morgue.
Oh boy.
Well, UPS is pretty much, if you're in management, UPS is pretty much like the military. If any of you all have ever worked there, you have family members. And so, of course, I had never told anybody about the helicopter crash because in my mind, it didn't happen. So it was the beginning of my tornado downward. Every time my phone rang at night, which it did all the time with my job because I worked with the pilots, I'm assuming I'm getting the call that we've had the crash. I get my hands close to my face, I'm smelling burned flesh. Their bodies were covered with jet fuel. I go out to the airport smelling jet fuel, and I mean, I am taking the tornado downward. Well, my family is pretty much riddled with depression. I'm talking about my original family. So I go into a 6-week treatment, outpatient treatment program trying to deal with depression. Of course, I'm in there trying to help all the 12 other people that are in there because you know what? And women are bad about that. We're caregivers. We're not care receivers. And so, you know, I'm proud. And I'm older than almost every one of them because I started in my mid-40s at UPS. So in this treatment program, I'm on my last week. And I realize on Monday, I'm going back to UPS, back to that responsibility of being in charge of the on-site morgue. So on Monday, you know, the program was from 8 to 12. I'm starting to have suicide thoughts. And on Thursday, there was a hospital very close to where we live. And on Thursday, I took myself up to the 7th floor of the parking garage, trying to think if there's some way that I could hoist myself up on the bumper of our Jeep Cherokee and take me off. Well, I am a little vain. I didn't want my family to see that. And so, you know, I go home, I put on the decent, functional face to my husband, I fix dinner. He is not much of a talker, like I said, and I do my thing. Well, Friday, on the last day of the treatment program, I'm really starting to panic. I come home, at about 12:30 I got home, and I'm thinking, I can't do this. I cannot go back to being in charge of the on-site morgue. So this time I took my bottle of Ambien, and I go back up to the top floor of the parking garage, and I took 18 Ambien. Now, if any of you all know what Ambien's like, it'll knock you out for 4 hours. And immediately I'm saying, oh my God, what am I doing? I want to live. I don't want to die, but I need help. So I ran inside the hospital. There were 2 gentlemen there. I said, get me the emergency room right away. I need help. Well, it was the beginning of my war to healing. I finally opened up. I told my psychiatrist about what happened. I told my family about what happened. And I started the healing process. Like I said, God saved me when I could not save myself. And that's what my mission is. If I can stop one other person, which I just did with a high school senior in Louisville, who told me if I had not been so honest about my suicide attempt and the journey that I went on, he would have been dead last night. So that's why I do what I do.
What other advice would you give to veterans today?
Veterans are not really good about talking as well as donut dollies about what they've seen and what they've done. We just are expected to be strong people, and women have had to fight hard for their roles in the military. There's a Netflix movie called 6888.
Yes.
Oh. And yes, if you have not seen it, World War II, you think women were treated poorly? I joined Netflix a couple of months ago specifically to watch that movie. But it's powerful, and I would just say, you know, I don't care. The military did not, or our government did not do a good job of keeping track of the numbers of women who served in Vietnam. There are 8 women who are on the wall. Only 1 was killed in combat. Not every one of the over 58,000 names on the wall were killed in combat. Everybody died in Vietnam, but there were other ways that people died other than actually being hit by enemy fire. But it's just important for us to continue to champion the military women. Back in our day, you know, the soldiers were, you know, they were drafted. You turn 18, most likely you're going to Vietnam with a gun in your hand that you may not have ever had before, placed in circumstances, but the women volunteered. And most of the women today continue to volunteer and take on, as our lieutenant colonel did, very difficult roles. But we are strong. I always tell my husband, you can't keep good women down.
definitely some similarities. You're still female in the military, and I think the military is at about 20% women now, and I was in the Air Force, and Air Force is, I think, around 35% maybe. So we're getting better. It's getting better. But it was only very recently that career fields were all opened up to women. Like, as long as you can meet the specifications now, if you can do the training and you can do all the physical tests, pass all the testing you need to do, then you're in. And it's taken a long time to get there, a very long time. So there are still some similarities in that it's still very difficult, but it's better. It's better than it was, definitely.
And what advice would you give to young women considering a military career today?
I would say do it. Same thing I would tell a man, do it. There's so many, like we've touched on, the relationships, the benefits, what you have when you come back home, or I'm sorry, after you get out of the military, the things that the VA can offer you, your health care, all kinds of those things. I would say absolutely do it. I did, if we have a moment, I did want to touch on, in the book, there was a time where after Frankie came back, and like her whole family, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but they were not proud like people are proud now of their children serving and of their family members serving. And I was very fortunate that I have an entire community. I have teachers that are here. I have members from my church that are here. My parents would be here, but they're watching my littles. And they've always been very proud. And that was something that was heartbreaking in this book, that you ladies had to deal with that. That there were, people just flat out denied that there were ever women in Vietnam, and it was heartbreaking. One other thing in the book that happened that resonated with me was, I think she was at an engagement party, and it was after she came back, and somebody was setting off fireworks, and she dove under a table, because it sounds like enemy fire. And I never saw direct combat. I was never shooting at people, but I was on a base that was attacked, and I had RPGs flying over my head, I had bullets whizzing past, and it is very real. When I came back, I was stationed at Edwards, like flight test capital of the world, sonic booms all the time. Everybody says it's the sound of freedom, and it is, but it's also the sound of indirect fire and people attacking you. And that diving under the table was that resonated with me, because there were times where I mean, you're so keyed up and like keyed in on things that you hear something that sounds like gunfire, and you're trying to find your helmet, you're trying to find your own long rifle, you're trying to find cover, whatever it is. And that's something that I think you touched on, the resources when we came back and how we don't talk about it. I came back in 2012, and I wasn't very thrilled with the reintegration that I had. When I landed at Ramstein, there were about 2 weeks where I was told, just go home and be with your family. Okay, well, my family's in Kentucky. Can I go with my family in Kentucky? No. Okay, so the point of reintegration is to like reintegrate into society and be with your family, and you're not letting me do that. So I was a little frustrated with that. Walking into the BX, for anybody, Ramstein is this huge base in Germany, and they have the largest BX, and it is bright, and it is colorful, and it is loud. All things that I did not like when I came back. The BX in Afghanistan, well, everything was brown, first of all. There was hardly any selection, there's nothing there. And, it sounds like, oh, that's awesome. You go back and you finally can get the chips you want, or whatever, right? No, it was unbelievably overwhelming, and I did not know why I felt that way. And, I talked to the mental health, behavioral health therapists, counselors, whatever. And I felt like I was kind of blown off, right? And I'm trying to talk about it, but I wasn't getting like what I felt like I needed. And that was 2012. And then in 2014, I was at a different base, and I tried again. I'm like, hey, I walk into Trader Joe's and I want to cry. Like, what is going on? Like, there are too many people. I don't understand. Like, I've never been this way in my life. But what's the deal? Yeah, whatever. Just, and nobody was, I didn't feel like anyone was really listening. It took until 2019, so 7 years after I got back, before I'll say the Air Force, but it could be the military in general, finally realized that there were things called invisible wounds. And like we look back at what you talked about, what you saw in Vietnam, like that is, you have to have counseling after something like that. And you're just expected to come back and reintegrate into society like you were on vacation or something. So it took 7 years before I finally found someone at Eglin Air Force Base who understood what was going on and could help. And there are things I'm not telling you about that happened in Afghanistan that I saw that I don't like to talk about. But veterans have to do that, and they have to get that counseling in. As an Air Force, the lady I spoke about earlier, Michelle, when she came back, it had been long enough that Ramstein had started a new reintegration thing, and it was weeks and weeks, and you would go through counseling and you would go through therapy, and they would tell you about these things that could happen. And so I feel like we're getting better as a military at addressing the mental health coming back. But man, it's taken way too long. Way too long. And that was a really long answer to a question.
That's okay. I'm going to ask a question on here that is not on here because we have time. This is for each one of you, so you can, whatever order you. Why did you decide to serve?
I'll go ahead.
I get paid to do this, so yeah.
I have a few different reasons. I guess I felt the calling, I felt the duty to do that. I have many members of my family that served in the military, Air Force, Army, whether it was during Vietnam, during Korea, World War II, Marines, Air Force, Army. I don't think I had any Navy in my family. But I had seen that, and I knew that I knew that was something that I wanted to do. And when I explain it to kids, I try to speak at the elementary schools for Veterans Day. When I explain it to the kids, I tell them, I want to keep my family safe, and I want to keep you safe. And I want you to be able to go to school. And they're like, no. When I was in Afghanistan, there were little girls on the street selling scarves. And I'm like, you need to be in school. And so as much as the little kids don't like that, that's why I serve, is to keep our families safe and keep our country safe. And it's just a sense of honor and duty for me.
I had a totally different story. A recruiter came to my nursing school class the end of my junior year, and I joined the military to get away from my father. My father hated women. I came originally from Wisconsin. He had an issue when his father died in his 50s, and his mother immediately sold a business that was going to be his. So to punish her, we moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And he hated women. And we had 3 girls in the family besides my mother. My father destroyed my mother mentally, and she didn't function after 50. It was all about what you weren't capable of instead of what you were capable of. And that carried through much of my life. I ended up marrying somebody that I never should have married a couple of months after I joined the military. He lived with my parents when I was in Vietnam, and my dad came home early from work and caught him in bed with another woman. So I got a divorce while I was in Vietnam. He's now been married and divorced 7 times. I've been married 52 years, so we can see who had the problem. One of the other issues that I had that, when people demean you, it's very difficult to move beyond that. And I was 25 years old back in Vietnam before I ever got a driver's license. So again, a captain. I was always a head nurse, on major orthopedic units, but I just didn't have the personal confidence in my normal life, which was, of course, driving a car. And, nobody's going to keep March down anymore because the guy that I married to said he wasn't going to marry somebody that didn't know how to drive, and I said, well, I guess you better teach me. And we almost didn't get married based on his teaching. But that's all right. I got my driver's license.
Have you ever considered an alternate career as a stand-up comic as well? I think you'd be quite good.
No, but
Hey, there's still time. There's plenty of time. Marcia, why did you serve?
This is going to sound funny at first. I chose to go to Vietnam because my mother refused to let me go. She said, I absolutely refuse to let you go. And I'm like, no, I'm 21, you're not going to tell me what to do. But it was just something that I wanted to do. I went down, I had an interview here at the Red Cross, and they told me about the two programs that the Red Cross was doing. One was in Korea, and the other one was in Vietnam. I thought, Korea is a little too cold. I didn't think about the war going on at all. I had been sitting in the Student Union building at Western, listening to all these kids talking about, the war and, it's all wrong, we shouldn't be there, blah, blah, blah. And I would ask them, I say, oh, when were you there? Were you in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines? No, we never been, I said, well, you don't know anything about what's going on over there. So I took a flight down to Atlanta for an interview, and actually they hired me on the spot, which should have told me that they were having a very hard time getting young girls to agree to do this.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, when I came home, Mom said, nope, you can't go, and I'm like, okay. And then she actually started making me some clothes to take with me, when I went over there. And I stayed a year, and when it was time to come home, the trailer next to ours was occupied by a USO girl, and it burned down. So she had to come into one of our trailers and kind of double up with us, and in the meantime, my replacement was supposed to come to the unit so I could work with her, do a little bit of on-site training. But that didn't happen because of the fire. There wasn't any place to put this girl. So I went to Saigon, and I met her there. Nice kid. Just, of course, just as green as could be. But she was really a good kid and really looking forward to it, very gung-ho. I come home, and I'd been home for maybe a month, not quite a month, maybe about 2 weeks. And I got up one morning, and my mom was standing in the kitchen with the newspaper, and she real quick put it behind her. And I said, what's wrong? She said, oh, nothing. She said, I just haven't finished reading this article yet. I said, okay. I got myself some coffee. And Mom looked out the window, and here comes my grandmother across the street with the newspaper in her hand, and she's waving. And Mom went to the back door. She goes, no, Mom, no. And Grandma came in anyway, and she goes, Marcia, do you know the Red Cross girl that was murdered last week?
Oh, gosh.
And I said, give me that article or the newspaper. And sure enough, it was Jenny Kirsch. And I went to pieces. I screamed and yelled. And that afternoon, I remember my dad coming in, he said, we're leaving. We're going to go on vacation. And I said, where are we going? And he said, well, we're going to go to Gatlinburg. And then we're going to go all around, state parks in Kentucky. And we went to Gatlinburg first, and then we went up to Cherokee. And they had this, at the state park there, they had an acting group, and they did this thing called Under These Hills. Mm-hmm. And it was about the mass exodus of the Trail of Tears. Yeah. Well, there's one scene in it where they fire off these big Kentucky long rifles, and when they did, I hit the deck. I was underneath my chair within about 2 seconds. And I remember my mom, and the person sitting next to me was like, well, what's wrong with her? And my mom just said, she just came home from Vietnam, leave her alone. That was my experience. But yeah, that girl was murdered, and then we lost 2 others. One to dengue fever, and one where the pin on her Jeep came out she was riding in, and the seat went out with her in it, and she was killed instantly. But that's why I went. I wanted excitement, I wanted to travel. It was fun.